is, so if we are to listen to the working of Christ within us, and that's where we get our wisdom and knowledge, how do we ensure that we're not crossing that boundary into individualism or like accidentally listening to something evil instead? Like, I'm wondering, is there a standard, or how do we know?
That's a very good question, right? And it will be addressed, I think, in the third talk more directly, but here is a preview.
Okay.
Because all of it is supposed to be a church experience, right? In other words, and the church actually has put in place all the safeguards, if you want, exactly against that. Because this is where it happens. So I'm not trying to suggest in this talk that this happens also in the abstract, in the privacy of our own room. Because that would be an extension of the developments. Right? We have the exact same attitudes. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to learn, I'm going to do this, I'm going to look at Christ in me, everything works out. That's not how it's supposed to work out. It's supposed to work out first and foremost in the liturgy.
Okay.
That's where Christ reveals himself in me. It's supposed to work out in confession. It's supposed to work out in the way I relate to others, everybody else, in my own community first and foremost. This is the church. The primary meaning of church is parish. Right? So that's also a development which I'm supposed to watch out for, where I work this out on my own and by myself. So there are all these safeguards, these if you want, very, very specific, right, aspects of the life of church there to make sure it's not happening. And that's why it is a problem when these things come down. It's a problem when we don't do liturgy the way we're supposed to do liturgy, when we don't do confession the way we're supposed to do confession, when we don't do parish the way we're supposed to do parish. One of the problems is that these safeguards are eroded, they kind of fall apart. And then church becomes another individualistic experience. The only thing we've done, we've replaced a set of rules with another set of rules, but the attitude is the same. So now I'm being individualistic, all about the fathers. I'm all about the church fathers, but I'm just this deeply individualistic, pragmatist, intellectualist, discursive person, an epistemological person, right? So that's why it's supposed to be experienced here in the community. This is where it all happens. This is where it all begins. And in the liturgy we see Christ, first and foremost in the liturgy, and in the Eucharist, right? This extraordinary thing where we spend about 50 cents, Canadian cents, not the real cents, on a piece of bread. Sorry, I couldn't pass that one. That was too good, right? So I was thinking money. It's like, oh, yeah, that's my joke. We'll see if you'll forgive me. We spent about 50 cents on a piece of bread and about maybe 75 cents on a little bit of wine. And we poured it into a chalice. And with, I think, all our worries and anxieties and concerns and our sweat. I mean, traditionally, all of these things were done in-house, right? So in my own household, I was raised by my grandparents for the first few years of my life. The wine would have a lot of my grandpa's sweat because he was in charge of the wine. And the bread would have a lot of my grandma's sweat because she was kneading the dough with her hands. And we put all of this into a chalice and we get back his life. Right? That's the liturgy. We go to God and say, here's 50 cents worth of bread and 75 cents worth of wine. Give me you. And he does. Well, at the beginning of the liturgy, the first time the priest uses incense, that's the nature of the liturgy. Right? That's how that establishes first and foremost, more than anything else, more than the mirror even, right? The proper relation to Christ, the look into the chalice. Again, the first time the priest blesses the incense, he says, well, this is one of the most ridiculous things we could possibly say, but it expresses beautifully the nature of the liturgy, right? We offer incense, right? The Christ our God as a scent of spiritual fragrance receive it upon your heavenly altar, and send down upon us in return, fair exchange, the Holy Spirit. And if you get it on sale, it's 5 cents. So here is 5 cents. All I want is the Holy Spirit. And He does. And He does. Right? Now, in that context, then the presence of Christ in me, in the mirror, happens. Only in that context. It's not contextless. I don't go to the mirror like void of all these other things that keep me in Him. But I go to the mirror already transformed by the liturgy, already melting because of communion, right? I go at the liturgy with His face in front of my eyes, right? And actually what it happens in private, many times you have to avert your eyes because you can't look at that much love. That's the face that people can see. We can't really have a vision of Christ. Because if we did, we died. We can't possibly fathom how He loves us. That's why it's craziness. And Paul uses the word for cuckoo. We can't imagine. That's why we say that He's the only one who loves mankind. Right? Several times. We call Him the lover of mankind in general, right? Philanthropist, the one who loves humanity. But there are several times we actually say the only one who loves mankind, because no one, and God knows we have really tried to love ourselves. And we try even harder these days, right, to be very self-loving. We indulge in everything. We love ourselves like to kingdom come. But it would be impossible even to love ourselves how He loves us. He's in a category of His own when it comes to love. And by the way, that's the meaning of John 3:16, is it? God so loved the world. The adverb there, outos, doesn't mean so much, but in such a way. Because His love for us is in a category of its own. That's how crazy it is. Right? We're informed by all of that, by that experience of church, Eucharist, incense, right? The 5 cents worth of incense. This, and then we go to the mirror, and He's revealed. In me, even in me. And it's unfathomable. It makes no sense. In me? Like there's this beautiful text in St. Simeon, the New Theologian. He has this extraordinary text. If you can read it, I would really encourage you to read it, the Hymns of Divine Love. And he has a moment, chances are it's immediately after communion though, true, where he looks at himself and he looks at his hands and he knows what those hands have done. But he realizes these are now the hands of Christ. How can that possibly be? Right? And these are the fingers of Christ. And this is the nose of Christ. And he can't wrap his head around it. And actually, in that hymn, eventually he pulls back from the thought. Because he's close to having a heart attack, literally. We can't understand God's love. It is truly in a category of its own. But the fact that He's there with us is also a certainty. That's the meaning, by the way. Father Emilianos, who is the spiritual father of my own bishop and my own spiritual father, Father Emilianos, the abbot of Simonopetra, said, this is the ultimate meaning of those words at the end of the liturgy. At the end of the liturgy, when the priest takes the gifts, the holy gifts, back to the table of preparation where he will consume them later on, he says with the disc and the chalice over the holy table, blessed is our God, in a lower voice. And he makes the sign of the cross. And then he turns to everyone and he's supposed to say out loud, like Father Misa will do tomorrow, always, now, and ever, into the ages of ages. Amen. Because what that means is that He will never go away. I will be with you always, like at the end of the gospel, right? Always, now, and ever, into the ages of ages. That's a certainty. And truth is, however much we try to make Christ go away, we can't. Not because of who we are. God knows we try very hard in our sinfulness, but because of who He is. That's the meaning of those words. Always, now and ever, into the ages of ages. Amen. Right? He won't go away. So that's another thing we learn in the liturgy. And then when we present ourselves in front of the mirror, if we really have the proper way to look at ourselves, and God knows we need it these days, in this life that's broken and desperate, we will see Christ staring back. And the thing is, He wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah, sorry. I have a problem with giving long answers to short questions. I don't know, there's maybe time for one more
We have
question?
5 minutes left before
5
lunch.
minutes.
We have one more quick question.
Yes. Oh, go for it. Oh, a question. Okay, so in case they couldn't hear, what is Scripture? God's selflessness. That's what Scripture is. Yes, yes. It is. So the reading I will ask you to read over the break from out of St. Silviu Bunta, the theologian, says Scripture is a chest. The chest is that. So by the way, what she's pointing to is the Orthodox Study Bible, so Scripture, right? But that's a chest. The treasures are all inside. The treasures are, and we have to know how to unlock it. And the treasures are in its life. Scripture is not a text. Scripture is not a text. That's the first thing I should say. Scripture is a life wrapped in a text. Like, as a Transylvanian, it's not Christmas yet, but I have my mind on gifts. To approach Scripture like a text would be to be excited about the wrapping of our Christmas gifts. But instead, what we're supposed to do is exactly pull that apart. I still love it. I mean, I'm a grown-up. Well, I did it. But when I get my Christmas gifts, I go out and I'm like, my wife looks at me like, we could have saved those, reused them. It's like, what's the fun then? So in a sense, to actually get to Scripture, you're supposed to tear apart the text to get to the life of it. Right? If you want in the afternoon, if we have time, God willing, we will. We'll look at maybe a passage or a couple of passages in Scripture and see how this new method actually applies, how Scripture looks like once we change this magnifying glass through which we look at it, right? If we switch to that more ancient magnifying glass, how does it look like? And it's God, it's beautiful.
How do you not use intellectualism to tear it apart?
Oh yes, right. So how do you, okay, sorry, repeat the question first. How do you not use intellectualism to rip it apart? Because you don't set up, it's about the way we set up the road, the way we set up on the journey. We don't set up on the journey for the sake of understanding or reading. The journey looks like this. The journey to Scripture is spiritual life. First and foremost, the foundation of all spiritual life is the turn to the inside, the attention to oneself. That's the beginning of spiritual life. Then a major second step is patience. So in other words, you practice spiritual, not practice, a bad word. You become, you let Christ grow in you. And Christ himself will read his own scriptures in you. And these things will open up in Scripture. Right? And I will look at it as if from the inside. The image I offered yesterday in a discussion with one of you, I'm not going to put you on the spot, was imagine we're movie directors and we record the movie. And we can do it, I think, two different ways. One of them is to have the camera always on the outside and looking at all the actors, the characters, right? And the other way is to move the camera constantly from the perspective of every single one of the actors. Right? So in other words, for 5 seconds, the camera looks as if from within Brad Pitt at this other actor. And then looks from within the other actor at Brad Pitt, or I don't know what your favorite actors are. It doesn't matter. That's the other method. But the way to accomplish that, so when I read a story in Scripture, it's not a story on the outside. It's not a story about something that happened 2,000 years ago, or it's my story. Because now I become Christ, and now I become, yes, and in the conversation was exactly the passage about the woman with the flow of blood. Now I'm the woman with the flow of blood. Now I'm St. Peter, who's actually reasonably upset. It's like, are you kidding me? Who touched you? That's the dumbest question you could be asking right now. Look at the crowd. You become all of them, right? And these different, deeper meanings of Scripture are just, they don't come at you because they are inside. It's like unbearing something that's already there. Right? So if you want, what I'm putting in front of you, if this is a proposal of looking at Scripture differently, what I'm putting up in front of you is a different way of directing a movie. Directing in this style called POV, point of view. And you change the camera to look from the eyes of every single actor. This is being done specifically in the language of the fathers. For example, by Saint Ephraim in his beautiful commentary on hymns on paradise. This is being done by the liturgy in the hymns. We, the people in church, sing hymns with all these different voices, right? It's even most obvious, for example, I think, is during Holy Week, when we have all these different dialogues between Christ and the Theotokos and the apostles and Caiaphas and Pilate. What voices are we using? We're using their voices. We become Pilate, we become Caiaphas, we become all of them. And then we answer back as Christ. It's like a dialogue with ourselves, right? We just talk to ourselves. That's what the hymn says, blessing. That's what the very nature of the liturgy is, to take this perspective which is within every single one of the characters, of the actors of that scene, as opposed to having this detached, distanced view where we just observe stuff, right? Does that make sense? But how does that actually happen? Spiritual life. Spiritual life. That's what it is. Spiritual life. Yes, sorry. Oh, okay, maybe one quick question. Yes.
Just a comment. It kind of brought to mind almost like an iconographer who is restoring a beautiful icon with years of things put over top and finding this beauty underneath, that maybe a team of iconographers, not even just one person, but just everybody's contributing to this beauty underneath.
Right.
And that imagery just came to mind. So.
Yes, yes. And many times iconographers, talking to a couple of them, actually they, in a sense, they paint themselves into everything they paint. Right? A good iconography is not iconography where the picture is at a distance from me, the iconographer. But good iconography is where I become the picture. There's this famous piece of literature. I always, to drive this point home when I talk to my students, who usually don't read Scripture, but, well, they know lots about Scripture, but they don't really read Scripture. But they read literature. I asked them to read a very short piece of literature by this gorgeous French writer, Marguerite Yourcenar. She has these Oriental poems. It was translated into English, and there is a story there. I think it's called the story of Wang Fo, a painter, who is asked by the emperor to paint the ultimate painting, his most beautiful painting, and he paints it, but in the emperor's palace. And Wang Fo, of course, knows that at the end of the painting he will be killed, so that he can never best his own work, so that the emperor really has the best painting of Wang Fo. So he decides to paint a lake scenery. Not a lake, a sea, right? It's a maritime scenery. And he paints the sea. And then when he's done, the emperor goes to fetch the guards. And he says, okay, now kill him. And they run into the room, and they want to find Wang Fo, but Wang Fo is in the painting in a boat that disappears in the horizon. That's how we're supposed to relate to picture. Go inhabit it. Like St. Ephraim, I said in the hymns, at the beginning he reads the text. He writes, well, you say these things about paradise, but then slowly he walks. He goes like, oh, and the smell of that flower, oh my goodness, and the color of that tree. And he's there. He's there. He entered the text. The text became three-dimensional. Now it's a life. It's a room, right? It's a place, three-dimensional place in which I live, I exist. Now Scripture is me. And experiences from the inside. And the dialogue he has in there with Christ and Adam is just breathtaking. Right? So, anyway, thank you for that one. Sorry about going on and on and on. The trick is to shut up Transylvanians. Oh yes, homework! Did you sense the overjoy in the ha-ha? So, if you have time, and if you can, 5 pages out of Saint Simeon. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll give it to Father Vincent, and I'll hand out this. Oh yes.
All right.